So hey everyone, we're really happy to be here and participating in this symposium. I'm Paulo, as Linda
And
mentioned.
yep, and I'm Meredith, so it's good to see everyone.
Yeah. So our study was completed with our co-authors Julie Luft and Brooke Whitworth, and is supported by the National Science Foundation. The title of our presentation is Professional Learning Opportunities and Interactions with Science Leaders of Out-of-Field Science Teachers in the United States. So first things first, we need to define what we mean by out of field teaching, as we were discussing right now, and Linda mentioned, there's a very difference between among context in defining out of field, but there is a general consensus in understanding that out of field teaching is a misalignment and a mismatch between a teacher's area of expertise and their teaching assignment. But lately, there are alternative ways of considering out of field by examining the dimension that you can measure. For example, Taylor categorized people as out of field if they taught one class outside of their area of expertise, while Nixon elaborated more on this degree of out of field teaching and specified 5 different levels of out of field that range between from completely out of field to completely in field. In the United States, as Harleen was mentioning, the definition of out of field teaching is dependent on the state policies, because it depends on how states measure out of field and define out of field. In some instances, for example, in California, teachers with the right content knowledge but not pedagogical training may be considered out of field, while in others, such as Florida, teachers are considered out of field if they're teaching one class that is not noted on their teaching certificate. So we can see that there are some differences in how different states define out of field. Taylor's study, so considering this binary view of out of field teaching, estimated the percentage of out of field teachers in science classes in the United States. And what they notice is that new teachers are more likely to teach out of field. Also, that middle school teachers also are more likely to teach out of field. Science teachers in the US are in transition, moving to a new vision for science learning that is practice focused and concept rich, so following the next generation science standards. And this new vision is difficult even for more experienced and in-field teachers. So it can be specifically difficult for teachers who are out of field, who may have the content and the pedagogical content knowledge to implement this new vision of teaching. Also, as Nixon estimated, the US has a high number of new science teachers teaching out of field, which can make this an important issue since out of field teachers are often delayed and constrained in building their knowledge and practice, which can also impact in student learning, as noticed by Taylor. So it's clear that out of field teachers, and especially newly hired science teachers, need specific support through both professional learning opportunities and interactions with their science leaders at the school and district level.
Yeah, and so research has shown us in what the previous presentation shared with us, the learning opportunities for new teachers are very variable, and they can come in both formal and informal settings with professional development opportunities that are more formal learning opportunities, opportunities through coursework and university coursework, but also through the one-on-one interactions with their colleagues and mentors and district science leaders. And our study today is looking specifically at district science leaders, which my understanding is a fairly unique position in the United States. And so district science leaders are often tasked with supporting science teachers in the work that they're doing, helping them implement the curriculum and supporting them with materials and resources, and also providing a lot of the professional learning opportunities that teachers engage in. And so our research question for this study is how, if at all, do in-field and out-of-field newly hired science teachers engage in different professional learning opportunities?
So to frame our study, we use Fassler and Christensen's framing of a teacher's career cycle. They divided teacher's career in 8 different phases, In this study, we're focused on the induction phase, which is defined as being the first years of a teacher's career when they're still refining their pedagogical knowledge, their professional knowledges, actively seeking and engaging in professional development and professional learning opportunity. This framing also divides the impactful factors into levels, and we're looking at how the organizational level, that is, district science leaders and the professional learning opportunities attended by them, impacts their induction phase. To define out-of-field teaching and out-of-field levels, we use Nixon's categorization of out-of-field status. For this, as previously mentioned, we have 5 different categories, varying from completely in-field to completely out-of-field. As defined by these authors, we compare the teacher's educational background to what they teach. For example, a teacher with a degree in secondary education in chemistry who teaches 2 physical sciences, so this is considered a mix of physics and chemistry, considered partially in-field and partially out of field, and 3 biology classes, so these are not related to chemistry and considered out of field, will be considered mostly out of field because more than half of the subjects they're teaching are out of field.
And so for our study, we had 32 participants from across the United States. And there are a few things that I want to point out about our participants. First, most of the participants were out of field, at least for part of their assignments. So 65% of the participants had half or more than half of the courses that they were teaching, courses that they were considered out of field. The second point that I want to share is that most of the participating teachers were in their first 3 years of teaching, so they're in that induction phase of the career cycle. And then third, most of the middle school teachers tended to be out of field. And with our definition, that happens because they tend to teach multiple science disciplines across the course of the school year in the middle school classroom, whereas in the high school, teachers tend to teach one discipline area more likely than they would if they were in middle school. So our study is part of a larger ongoing study, and our analysis followed a multiple methods approach. So first, I'll share a little bit about the data collection. It occurred over the course of 1 school year and started with an initial survey administered in the fall of 2023. And that survey collected participants' demographic data, including their years of experience, their educational background, and their current teaching assignments. And then we had an initial interview where participants were able to share about the frequency and nature of their professional learning opportunities, and start talking about their interactions with district science leaders. And then at 3 separate times throughout the year, as part of a larger study, teachers engaged in a week in review interview and reported on their weekly instruction. However, during those interviews, we also captured their recent professional learning opportunities and their recent interactions with district science leaders. And then at the end of the year, we conducted an end of year interview in the spring or summer of 2024, where teachers were able to reflect on their professional learning experiences across that year, also summarize their interactions with district science leaders, and reflect on how their interactions with district science leaders influenced their instructional practices. And for our analysis, we used the initial survey to determine teachers out of field or in-field status. And so we compared the courses that they were teaching to their educational background that was reported. In our second piece of analysis, we had a team of graduate students who worked through iterative rounds of coding to develop a binary code book to capture the participants' professional learning opportunities, as well as their interactions with their district science leaders. And once we had that code book finalized, the researchers rotated in pairs to examine the week in review interviews, as well as the end of year interview, to try and capture all of the professional learning opportunities and interactions that the participants had throughout the year. And then finally, Paulo and I have been utilizing thematic analysis to look more in depth at some of the questions on our initial interview and the end of year interview to identify patterns and trends within the teacher's experiences, but also between the experiences of in-field and out-of-field teachers regarding their professional learning opportunities and interactions with their district science leaders.
So our first finding was that professional learning opportunities attended by teachers do not vary across out-of-field levels. These are professional learning activities teachers reported engaging in, which could include a range of activities from university classes to district-provided professional development. As we can see from the distributions, the numbers of PLOs, professional learning opportunities, was very spread with very similar means and minimum and maximum values. When we look at the qualitative data, our qualitative analysis revealed that the topics do not vary across out-of-field levels. The professional learning opportunities attended by the newly hired science teachers approach very different topics, such as analyzing student data, classroom management, supporting diverse students, such as multilingual learners, and general instructional tools that are useful to any teacher and they're not specific to science. For example, a completely in-field, so looking at the first to the left here, quote, reported that they had professional learning opportunities focused on building relationship with students, equitable grading, and gizmos and canvas, which are instructional resources that are general to all content areas. And a completely out-of-field teacher attended professional learning opportunity focused on classroom management, testing, and different ways to teach. Our second finding that emerged from the analysis of the interview questions is that out-of-field teachers expressed their needs for science professional learning opportunities, arguing that they wanted professional learning opportunities focused on how to teach science or help with specific content topics that they were going to teach. One completely out-of-field teacher reported that if they're teaching a class that is out of field, such as biology or chemistry, they need help like doing a demonstration or tools to help students. A mostly out-of-field teacher, on the other hand, say that they have been choosing science professional development to help with instructional breakdown to meet the standards to specific out-of-field content that is going to be tested. So even though they're recognizing this need for science professional learning opportunities, when we look at the number of science-specific professional learning opportunities across the out-of-field status, out-of-field teachers are not receiving specific opportunities to develop their content and their pedagogical content knowledge, as we can see from the distributions here. The distributions of number of science professional learning opportunities are even throughout the out-of-field levels, as we can see here. Our third and final finding is about the newly hired science teachers' interactions with their district science leaders. Our descriptive analysis, so looking at the distributions again, showed that the number of interactions between these teachers and their science leaders do not vary throughout the out-of-field levels. And our qualitative analysis showed that the frequency of these interactions can vary even when we consider one teacher throughout the year. For example, we have a quote from a completely out-of-field teacher here that showed that their interaction with the district science leader depended on her availability, varying from none to 3 times a week throughout the year. While the number of interactions between district science leaders and this in-field and out-of-field teachers do not vary, we have a nuance here when it comes to the nature of these interactions. So out-of-field teachers often reported that their district science leaders helped them with content they did not master. For example, a mostly out-of-field teacher with a degree in biology stated that their district science leader helped them with geology, offering a crash course to help them navigate the content. Another quote here is that is from a completely out-of-field teacher that stated that never have done a dissection lab before, and because of that, their district science leaders showed up and co-taught the lab with them. And another completely out-of-field teacher said that their district science leaders helped them with instructional breakdown of an unknown topic, helping them developing the knowledge of strategies to help their students. And that's the findings that we have for this study. And now moving to the discussion.
All right, and so to kind of revisit our research question, we asked how, if at all, do in-field and out-of-field newly hired science teachers engage in different professional learning opportunities? And there are 3 points that we want to emphasize. And so the first thing that we noticed was that our newly hired science teachers that participated in our study, they were engaging in a variety of different learning opportunities. And those opportunities would range, and Paulo, you can go ahead and click it. Sorry, we animated this slide. Yeah. Those opportunities ranged in the number and types of opportunities available to them, as well as the topics that they visited within those opportunities. And it didn't, and those chances didn't vary across in-field or out-of-field status. And so what we noticed is while those experiences are beneficial for newly hired science teachers, the out-of-field science teachers are not necessarily receiving any differentiated support relative to their in-field peers. And so they're engaging in the same number of, type of, and topics of professional development, but it highlights a missed opportunity to support newly hired science teachers who are out of field. And then the second point that we want to emphasize is returning to the literature, that we know that being an out of field teacher is an additional burden on teachers who already have a very challenging job and a very challenging position. And so being out of field can be an additional challenge that hinders teachers' development and can ultimately impact student learning. So this may make it more difficult for out of field teachers to progress through their levels of career development. They may stay in that induction phase a little bit longer than a teacher who is in field. And then the third point is that we noticed in our qualitative analysis that the one-on-one interactions and those one-on-one environments provide really powerful learning opportunities for out-of-field teachers, where their district science leaders or other supporting colleagues, as Harleen and Elena mentioned in the previous presentation, they're interacting with their colleagues and their peers to get the support that they need. And so this aligns with research that shows us how teachers learn in a variety of ways and through a variety of professional learning opportunities. And so what this study adds to what we know about newly hired science teachers and suggests is that newly hired science teachers are actively seeking social resources and assistance from their colleagues, including district science leaders. However, there's more for us to learn about how they're doing this, how they're engaging in those interactions, and how they're seeking those interactions out. Also, we need to explore how to better support science teachers within their educational system. So both so that they can be more strategic in selecting the professional learning opportunities that will meet their needs, but also so that those who are providing professional learning opportunities can be more strategic in how they're supporting newly hired out-of-field science teachers. And so finally, as educational researchers, we really need to better advocate for our out-of-field teachers. And this means sharing information with policymakers and district administrators and leaders about what out-of-field teaching is, its prevalence, and its cost, both on the development of teachers and on the impact of student learning. The presentation with the the institutional framework and thinking about the cultural piece that a lot of administrators will put teachers in positions, and they need to understand what it is and the challenges on teachers when they're placed in a position and they're teaching out of field, so that they can provide the support that they need. So we need to help those individuals who are working with out-of-field teachers to be more aware of their instructional needs, help them have the appropriate resources and supports to continue to develop and become amazing teachers. And then finally, we need additional research to continue studying how out-of-field teachers are impacting teachers within different disciplines and how their various backgrounds may be influencing their experiences as out-of-field teachers. And that is our presentation, and we're very grateful to the teachers who participated and to the National Science Foundation. And yeah, we're ready for questions.